Hi.
Hi, I see an empty couch.
Yes. I didn't hear from, I'm assuming Liz is coming. I didn't,
Or
didn't
you would
hear-
hear from her, I guess.
Yeah.
So,
How are you?
okay. I'm well. I'm having Mohs surgery. I have a basal cell carcinoma right in the middle of my forehead. Like, and tomorrow morning they're taking it off. So, yeah.
All right. So
Yeah.
everything should go well.
Yes,
And
thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
is this the first time that you've had that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Anything?
First, David's had a couple.
Uh-huh.
David, yeah. So,
Almost everybody I know at some point has had one or something. Here she is.
Good
Here's
morning.
Liz.
good morning,
The
Liz.
world is
Morning,
right.
Rabbi.
Hi, Estelle. Everything is back in order.
Oh,
The
that's a
world is
good
right.
Yeah.
Because Liz is here.
Because of you.
Yeah.
I got a link now to ChatGPT.
Nice.
I haven't figured out what to ask it, what I want to know, but
I have started just asking it things I'm curious about as if I'm having a conversation, with it.
right.
And so far it has never disappointed. It doesn't always, it's not like if I zero in on something I'm curious about, it just hasn't
If you get real
disappointed.
deep.
Right. It's not necessarily the final word on a subject, but it's like you're talking to an intelligent
Right.
friend. That's what I feel
Oh,
like.
that's almost scary.
Yeah. I had that one conversation, which I think I shared with you, where
Right.
it went back and forth. And at one point I had said, you didn't answer this one point, and it goes, you're right. Yeah. And then but like the other day I was reading something, a criticism of a particular postmodernist. And I don't know very much about modernism or postmodernism. And and certainly not when it comes to understanding the boundaries of all these categories, etc. But there is this wave in Jewish thinking, especially in Israel. This has become more popular in Israel, that I was surprised that it was even something, because I had sort of just taken this for granted from all my studies and from the teacher I had been learning with. I never thought that this had to be a thing or something new. I just thought this is how we learned and thought about things. So I'm reading about it, finding out that no, this is apparently a defined category, and it's something new, and it hasn't always been the case. But there's this notion that we talk about profound ideas, but we really can't understand very much at all. Certainly we don't understand something to its full depth of profundity. To make a categorical statement, that something is true or not true, implies that somehow you could know everything about something, or could know even enough about something to be able to make some kind of real definitive statement about it. And so I've always, I guess it was the particular teachers I had, but I just always felt this was the case about things in general, that there are, and I remember sharing that Ramosha Shapiro, one time I asked Ramosha Shapiro about the 13 principles of faith that the Rambam says, the 13 principles of faith of the Rambam. And I said, it's like, it seems unfair. You're asking somebody to believe in something, but you know there's no way we could even know it.
Right.
How am I supposed to believe, how can I declare that I believe in this thing if it's something that's so profound? In some of the cases, you wouldn't even tell me what it means, even if I asked you. It's like, like it's Kabbalistic or, some kind of deep, subtle philosophical point
Right.
that is available to the very few. And then, but you're saying, no, this is one of the principles of faith, and you have to believe in it if you don't believe it. So that's when Moshe said, you just can't say you don't believe it. So even at the time, I didn't fully understand what he meant by it, but I think now that what he means is something like, and what he meant, and this was the question I was asking ChatGPT about. Here, I've got it.
Sorry, guys, we're off on a tangent.
Aren't we always? Isn't all
Yes.
of life a tangent?
Yes.
So you saw do you have an Android or a
Mine is an
Apple?
Android.
Right. So I know for Apple, there's actually just an app. You just click it and you're already in message mode. But you have a link.
Yeah.
Link. That's how I
But I
started.
didn't put the link on my phone. What I did was I went to Google and I used my Google account to go into ChatGPT.
Uh-huh.
So I didn't want to download an app because there were 6 of them. When I
Right.
went to the store to get it, there were like 6 different apps and I didn't
Right.
know which one I wanted.
Right.
So I just,
So the question, so I asked it. First, does postmodernism deny the existence of truth or just our ability to know them? Postmodernism does not necessarily deny the existence of truths outright, but rather it questions our ability to access or know them with certainty. This is ChatGPT.
Mhm.
Postmodernism challenges the idea that there are universally valid and objective truths that can be fully grasped or understood. It emphasizes the subjective nature of knowledge, suggesting that our understanding of truth is influenced by cultural, historical, and individual perspectives. Postmodernism recognizes that our knowledge and interpretations are shaped by various factors such as language, power dynamics, social context, and personal biases. It highlights the limitations of language and representation, arguing that meaning is constructed rather than fixed. This viewpoint leads to skepticism about claims of absolute truth and an emphasis on multiple perspectives of interpretations. In essence, while postmodernism questions the possibility of objective truths that can be universally known, it doesn't necessarily deny the existence of truths altogether. It invites a critical examination of the ways in which truths are constructed, communicated, and understood within specific contexts. So that's why, so I think that's how I'm now understanding that answer of Moshe Shapiro. In other words, we assume there is a truth. Okay, we assume there is a truth. It's very possible that individual human beings could never fully access that truth with certainty on your own. But that doesn't necessarily mean there isn't a truth. So his point was, as long as you accept the truth, even if you don't understand it, you can be within what we would call the framework of Judaism. To deny the truth, right? And was to recognize that you don't understand it, that is not a problem. It's possible that nobody could understand it. No, I don't think so.
But Rabbi,
Yeah.
Yeah, I get all that. I would like to know how Maimonides, the formulation, the access to those particular principles, what overriding truth he understood. But what am I trying to say?
Right.
How does
So
he
something
know?
like God is one, you could say the Torah is saying that he doesn't, let's say you have a notion of God is one, the oneness of God. So you could say that I don't think the Rambam would agree with this postmodernism.
Right.
The Rambam doesn't agree with it. But I'm saying, let's say you have a notion, and this might be like the ones who argue on the Rambam, perhaps, but he was sort of suggesting it as a model even for those ones of the Rambam, the 13. But maybe somebody could argue that it would, in order for something to really be in this category, it has to be something like explicitly said in the Torah, like God is one. So you have something explicitly said in the Torah, so you didn't derive it, like the Rambam, like God, the fact that also that God has no body. You could say the Torah says it. The Torah says you saw him. There was no image. There was no form, etc. You could say the Torah is saying that as well, even though the Rambam, when it gets to the finer parts of this argument, we saw that the Rambam in our Rambam class that when it comes, is it possible to say he has? You could get into some kind of discussion about it, whether or not that should be one of the ikrim, whether that should be one of the principles of faith or not. That
Right.
He's non-corporeal.
Yeah.
Somebody could argue that it says it in the Torah. It says you saw he doesn't have a form or anything.
Yeah.
So to me, if it says it in the Torah, then you could say that's a truth. Is it possible for me to fully understand it? No, but it's a truth. And just because I can't fully understand it, it would be wrong to say there is no truth there. And you're not forced to say there's no truth there. You would just say that I don't expect to be able to get to an absolute certainty about this truth. But I'll make whatever effort, and maybe that's not expected. Maybe when it says that there are 70 faces to the Torah,
Yep.
Things like that, or Elu Elu Dira Lakim Chaim, that it wasn't expected for us to ever fully comprehend or have a truth with certainty. But it does seem like the Rambam does not agree with this.
Yeah, it seems like he believes he has total access to the truth.
Yes.
The truth. And that there are 13 principles.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That suggests it too. Yeah, I agree. The other thing I happen to ask it is related to our parsha, but we're not in this section of the parsha yet. But I did ask about. 1 second. How do I go back to where I was?
I haven't even figured out how to form a question for it.
So
I'll get
let's see. Oh, history. So I asked it. Do you find? Let's see. How would you compare and contrast the Jewish Nazir as described in the Torah and Talmud with a Catholic monk?
Well,
so so he says the Jewish Nazir as described in the Torah and expanded upon in the Talmud and a Catholic monk share some similarities in their commitment to a religious life of dedication and separation, but there are significant differences between them as well. Vows and commitment. Both the Nazir and the Catholic monk take vows and commit themselves to a life of spiritual devotion. The Nazir takes a temporary vow, usually for a specific period of time, while the Catholic monk typically takes a lifelong vow. Purpose of separation. The Nazir separates from certain activities and practices, such as abstaining from wine, cutting hair, and avoiding contact with the dead, as a means of personal holiness and dedication to God. On the other hand, Catholic monks separate themselves from the world and its distractions to focus on prayer, contemplation, and service to God within a context of a monastic community. So there is no, apparently, it's suggesting there's no Nazirite community that you're devoting yourself to. Social context. The Nazirite vow in Judaism is an individual commitment, and the Nazir can continue to participate in community life while observing the specific restrictions. Catholic monks, however, often live in monastic communities where they follow a communal rule of life, which includes specific obligations and routines shared by all members. Structure and hierarchy. Catholic monasticism has a well-defined hierarchical structure with different levels of monastic orders and an abbot or superior overseeing the community. In Judaism, the Nazirite vow is a personal decision, does not have a formal organizational structure or hierarchy. Theological framework. The Nazirite vow finds its foundation in the Torah and is rooted in the ancient Jewish tradition. It is seen as a voluntary act of devotion to God. Catholic monasticism, on the other hand, has its theological basis in Christian teachings and is often associated with specific religious orders within Catholicism, such as Benedictines, Franciscans, or Dominicans. In summary, while both the Jewish Nazir and Catholic monk embrace a life of dedication and separation for spiritual reasons, they differ in the nature of their vows, social context, structure, and theological framework. The Nazirite vow is a personal commitment within the broader Jewish tradition, whereas Catholic monks are part of a structured religious order within the context of Christianity. Do you find any sources that indicate that the Catholic monk was inspired by Jewish Nazir? There is no direct evidence to suggest that Catholic monks were specifically inspired by the Jewish Nazir. It is possible to draw some parallels and influences between the two practices, but it's important to note that monasticism emerged in the early centuries of Christianity, which was influenced by Jewish religious practices, including asceticism, a separation for the purpose of devotion. Early Christian ascetics sought to imitate the life of Jesus, etc. While there may be conceptual similarities between the Nazirite vow and the practice of monastism, it's important to understand that monastism and Christianity developed within its own unique theological and historical context. It would be more accurate to say that Catholic monasticism was influenced by a broader range of factors and traditions, including Jewish ascetic practices, rather than directly by the Jewish Nazirite vow.
Wow.
Anyway,
It
so-
seems that to me, if you're as learned as you are, and you go, wow, yeah, I think this is true, because you know that part of it. So do you assume that it's right on the other side too about things you don't know? Do you know what I mean?
I wouldn't like that. I would right now, I'm only considering it like having an intelligent conversation with a friend. If I was actually pursuing this, I wouldn't rely on that.
Right.
I would now start to look further. But like when I'm having a first thought about something, just to like I would friend, just to have the conversation. It's like that thing with postmodernism, and that was an idea that was tickled by something that I read, somebody criticizing something somebody else was writing about, and so that's what I like for something like that. I would look at it. I would follow through. Like I did ask for the postmodern, like I asked, can you list me 5 postmodernist thinkers, and just a brief review of their contribution. And it did that. So it would give me, like, if I was looking for more, I think it would give me the beginning of a beginning roadmap. But I would only take it as the beginning of a conversation about it. I wouldn't. But having, like, to me, like, to have somebody to immediately talk to about it, I felt like what I was in situations like when I was teaching at Orsa Math, I was in situations where I could just turn, like if I had a question about language, there were linguists there. You know, I could ask linguists. And if I had a question about philosophy, there were philosophers there. I could talk to them about, and so I could have just somebody to like a bounce thing off of, just as a part of, and certainly in learning.
So you're saying that if you went to a Wikipedia article, you couldn't, it wouldn't be a dialogue. You'd have to,
Right, like so I'd have
somewhere
to,
else.
right. So there, I might find my answer. But a lot of times that's what my searches have been for the last, since the beginning of the internet, that I would look for somebody who talks about it and hope that they're going to talk about this specific issue.
Right. Mhm.
Right. But here it will directly talk about it. And I found that it's set up to do that. You know what I mean?
Well, it's a
set up to
chat.
do-
It's a
Yeah,
chat.
that's really what it's set up to do. At first, I was just doing things like write an essay on this and do it as a stand-up comic or something, just like that. But now I realized that this is what I want, much more than that. Is what
It gets scarier and scarier.
not to me, it's the
I do.
opposite. Right.
It's your new best friend.
Even my mother, did I tell you about that thing with my mother?
You told me, but they weren't here.
Right.
No.
So I was showing it to my mother. I was in St. Louis last week and I was showing it to my mother. And so my mother was a teacher of literature, of American and British lit and creative writing. And so she continues to do book clubs and to sort of moderate book clubs and stuff. So I was telling her about, what I was doing with it. And she goes, all right, let's try something. She said, ask it to present 5 open-ended questions for discussion about the book Ethan Frome. So I just wrote that in like that. And then I handed it to her and she looked at it and she goes, I would have never thought of that. And there was one question, one of the questions, she goes, that's excellent. And I would have never thought of it.
Wow.
And she's been like, so I downloaded it for her. I downloaded the app for her. And she said her plan is she'll read a book, she'll write up her ideas, and then she's gonna
Go ask.
ask ChatGPT and see
We
what
gotta
it
give
brings
it
up.
a name.
Yeah, but then there is a danger in personalizing it. There's this movie on Peacock called Mrs. Davis or something.
Yeah.
And it's about an algorithm that has basically taken over the world. And this woman, and one of the things they say is, don't give it a name. If you give it a name, you personalize
Like
it.
Hal.
Right.
Remember Hal?
Yeah, don't give it a name. Don't give it a name. Okay.
Rabbi, this is also quite scary. I mean, like take students, they could just say, write me an essay on whatever. And, it can turn out an essay and you've done, it's like you're at a disadvantage because you're really not using your own brain for this.
Right. I know they're going to
Some
eventually.
ways. I'm sure it
are.
has many advantages, but, in instances like this, and I think the college students or even high school students do
Right.
that sort of thing. It's like cheating.
Fine. So
And-
then that
and
all
all
I
of
this is,
the kids in the class will go and ask it the same, I need an essay on this.
but it doesn't
It'll-
give the same thing.
it'll-
It never gives the same thing.
Really?
I've tried it. I myself tried it where I asked it to I said, write a movie treatment on this subject, and it got stopped. Something happened with the Wi-Fi, it got stopped. So then I asked it the same thing again, and it gave it
Really?
was different details. The thing is, eventually they're going to figure this out. Until they figure it out, if I was, let's say, a high school creative writing teacher, I would ask them to write the essay in class.
Well, yeah.
Just write the essay in class. And then
Then
if
you
I
know.
wanted to use ChatGPT, I would say, write the essay in class. All right.
And
Then ask ChatGPT to do it and compare it and see what you like about ChatGPT, what you like about yours. But if they're worried about that, then just have them do it in class.
Exactly.
If you need them to write a 40-page essay on
Right.
something, so temporarily you're not going to be able to do that. That will not be the worst thing that ever happened to creative writing, that somebody didn't get to assign homework that makes somebody do 10 hours of writing on their own. Each thing, like, I understand the problem, but if you read, there are actual polemics against the written word. When they started writing in Rome, when they started with parchment and quill, there were people who felt like this was the end of intellectual, of the intellectual life, because some guy is going to be given the responsibility to write the thing out, who doesn't understand the ideas he's writing, and all sorts of mistakes are going to creep in. And then we're going to end up with all manner of foolishness instead of the reliable oral passing out of information from teacher to student. So even the quill and parchment at one time was, but this thing, the deliciousness of the
I know,
opportunity.
Rabbi and Estelle, I just have to tell you, there is a man named Jaron Lanier, Lanier, Lanier.
Yeah.
He's a Jewish guy. He works for Microsoft. He's a real high-tech guy. You have to listen to his podcast about it. He gives you all the problems that it could be. And the whole thing is that the human input will go away. The way your mother sought to use it is so perfect because it's humans using the technology, and instead of just relying on what the technology tells you. Please look him up.
I'm just saying, whatever he says, I'm just saying, if this doesn't already exist, this exists in a million ways. How about viruses? How about bacteria? How about,
right?
Why is it any different than a new virus? Why is it any different than a new bacteria? Why is it any different than coronavirus? Why is it different?
Smarter. Well, they're smarter than us too, in a way. Okay. All right.
I'm just saying,
What was
whatever.
his name? Give me his name again.
Jaron, Jaron is his first name, and Lanier, Lanier.
Okay, I'll look him up.
Please.
Thanks.
Whatever he says, I just want you to know.
He's fun to watch too. He's crazy. When you look at him, he's crazy looking and everything, but he's married to a Jewish
I
woman.
might have somewhere.
It just to me, that first gut reaction to when something is offering something so precious, to come up with a gut reaction, it's so reliable that something that has such an upside will be completely shut down by people who just there's always going to be somebody who wants to shut something down, always.
Yep.
Right.
They should have shut it down.
Why didn't they? Yeah, that's what they want to do. They want to shut it down. That's what people want to do, because these questions are never going to go away. If you have to answer every problem that can come up with something before you do it, you're never going to do anything. It's just, but there's people that until you can answer this, it's the same thing with biogenetic engineering. And if it wouldn't be for biogenetic engineering, if it wouldn't be for we wouldn't be able to feed the people on this planet. If it wouldn't be for things like fertilizers, you would not be able to feed the people on this planet. You would already have you would have billions of people dead. But there are still people that would rather they didn't exist. But they'd rather, they have some kind of thing that you have to answer every single problem before you can use something. Obviously, there need to be people concerned about these things, but there's the knee-jerk reaction to try to shut it down because of it. That's the part. And you don't
Who's
experience.
trying to shut it down?
I live in communities where people are trying to shut it down.
Oh, yeah, lots
Yeah.
of people are,
Right.
even people in the tech world are
Yeah.
talking about shutting it down.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, that is.
Or
All right.
putting constraints on it.
Yeah. Now I get the idea of being concerned, and I'm not. I wouldn't want people who are concerned not to have a voice. It's just that next step that people. There's some kind of assumption. Even people who use there are people who it was a kind of catchphrase of the early Obama administration, which is that when we're going to have fact-based discussion, data-driven policies, and fact-based discussions.
Oh,
which
yes.
It sounds, of course you want to do that. It's just, do you know how much time it takes to get data? So if you are only going to do things that are data-driven, and by data-driven you mean there's been lots of time to gather data, you can't do anything. It takes decades to get data, decades. So if you want to make real-time decisions about things, and it just obviously of course in an ideal world you'd want every decision you make to be data-driven.
And factual.
Yeah, and based on facts. It's
It's
just the
the fear,
opportunity.
like Oppenheimer, when he said, I am
Yeah.
destroyer of
Yeah.
worlds. I am
Yes.
destroyer of worlds. Right.
Yes, and you could get the fear. That's healthy. It's healthy. It's just that to take that next step, that you have to be sure before you do something. We just don't live in a world like that.
No.
We don't live in a world like that. You have to be sure, and that you can't take a next step until you're sure. And there's a kind of crippling.
Boy, would people have to be quiet.
Right. There's a kind of crippling anxiety that can replace, curiosity and intellectual exploration and things. If you have to be absolutely sure. I get the problem. I'm not saying it's not scary. I get the problem. Just that next step, the step of closing it down because I'm not sure. Also, we have a thing about change. We have a thing about change. We are nervous. There are many of us who don't want things to change. Yeah, there's many of us. I get nervous about change, even though change is the nature of life. Life changes. It's always changing. But there's certainly, I like things to be the same. I didn't like it when the Yankees lost the World Series. I don't, I'm upset that the Warriors are not in the finals. And I like things to be the way they're supposed to be. And I like
David, too, the warrior.
Yeah, but it's like you feel like the world's falling apart if the Warriors are not in it, or if LeBron is not dominant, or something, because that and that's part of it is because it's hard to accept change, even though change is the nature of things. I feel like this is not necessarily a deep thought, but a lot of times when people are upset about climate change, I get it. I'm not arguing about the science or the human involvement in it. I'm just but there's like another step. Like, let's say somebody shows that the snows are melting on Kilimanjaro. So for a lot of people, that visual is enough to support the idea that we need to change our behavior. But to me, there's another question, which is, in other words, I see change. I just want to understand why that change is bad. Why is it bad? Now, there are explanations for why that's bad, because there's a shift in moisture patterns, and there's places that are not getting rain, and there are people that live there and they're going to die because there's not enough rain. If somebody makes that point and they're using the snows on Kilimanjaro as evidence that there is a change in climate patterns and it's going to lead to the death of many people, that's bad. But just showing me that there's no snow on Kilimanjaro is all that shows is change. That doesn't show that
What's gonna
bad
happen
change, because
because-
change happens.
Yeah.
Change. Okay. All right. That was the end of the rant for today. It's the same rant. And
I have to
will say
admit,
this
if
every
climate
day
change
for-
gives us the winter we had this time, bring it.
I know. There's things like that. Now, but then somebody will
But it
point
was
out.
terrible
I-
for other people. It
Yes,
was
there are
terrible.
people in industries in Wisconsin that rely on snow
Yeah,
that
I know.
that that lost their parnasa and all these kinds of things. Then I understand. Or if you say in Bangladesh, there's flooding and
Right.
thousands or possibly millions of people lives are at risk.
That's bad.
Excellent argument. But otherwise, just the fact that things change is not necessarily bad. It's reality. You may not want it. Okay. Speaking of bad, we had the discussion of sota. That's the subject that we have been studying. We're in Naso. This is our week where we're in the same Torah portion.
Yay. Okay.
All the world except for Israel is reading Parshas Naso. In Israel, they read Parshas Naso last week because Shavuos was on Friday.
Right.
They had a regular Shabbos. We, outside of Israel, did not read Parshas Naso, so we have Parshas Naso this week, and therefore we are this week learning the same subject that is the portion of the week. And we are in the Naso portion, the Sota portion, which we read. And we talked about a little bit. So that was from, that's in chapter 5, from verse 11. We did. So it went from verse 11 till the end of chapter 5, so altogether it's 20 verses. 20 verses. It's a long and detailed discussion of this scenario, and I suggested that P.G. Wodehouse, the English author, might have been inspired by the Sota portion when it comes to his development of the character Bertie Wooster, who is one of his, and his relationship with Jeeves, who is his butler, because Bertie Wooster is always trying to come up with some kind of fix for a problem, and they are radical and outlandish and lead to all sorts of hysterical situations. And this, the way it is typically explained is like that. So in a Bertie Wooster case, you would have, let's say, a good friend who is engaged and the engagement was broken up. And Bertie has decided that if he could just get the two of them together and create a scenario where his good friend saves the life of the woman that he was engaged to, she is going to see what she originally loved in him, and her love's going to be rekindled, and all is going to be well with the world because they will once again be engaged and eventually get married. So all he has to do is that. So maybe he creates a scenario where she is encouraged to go swimming, and there's some kind of a something happens, and then he has to jump in, and of course all things go wrong and she practically drowns and he isn't able to save her, but the point is that something dramatic was done in order to save her. So this is how this scenario is typically explained when you read this scenario. If you're explaining it in a kind of modern context, and if you read this in almost any kind of modern treatment of the Sota story, it will be shown to you that this is what's going on, that you have a situation where there is a married couple and the husband has developed a belief that his wife is having an affair. And in reality, she is not having an affair, but he thinks she's having an affair.
No, she's arranging a surprise party for him.
Could be she's arranging a surprise party, exactly. So he thinks she's having an affair. And how are we going to remove him of this idea? It's very hard to ever remove that idea from his head. So a scenario is created where God is going to, it's going to be a situation where it's almost like God himself is telling this guy, she didn't have an affair. I'm going to show you she didn't have an affair, because if she had an affair, she would have died, and she didn't die. So she didn't have an affair. So that's the scenario. This is how it is presented nowadays. And there is evidence for it. And we've talked about that. The evidence is, first of all, that, well, not all the evidence is obvious, but you could put together the following facts. Fact one is she does not have to go through with this if she doesn't want to. This is not a court of law. If she had been caught in having an affair and there were actual witnesses, let's say somebody hired a private detective and the private detective went as a team, two people went, and they actually saw them intimate with each other, that doesn't go to the Beit HaMikdash. That goes to a court of at least 23 people, because this is a capital case. It's going to go to a court of 23 judges at least, and witnesses are going to be called. And if in fact everything is in place, they will be executed. It's a capital crime, and it's carried out in a court. This is not that. This is happening in the Beit HaMikdash. It's not happening in a court. There may be court involvement to get it to the Beit HaMikdash, but this is as long as there aren't two witnesses that saw them intimate with each other, this is not going to an actual court. So that's it. And she doesn't have to go through with this if she doesn't want to. She could say, I don't want to. Now, if she doesn't, there's a divorce and she doesn't get her ketubah. But she doesn't have to go through with the ceremony if she doesn't want to. And I've seen somebody in this treatment suggest that it is even wrong to think that the woman is not in control of this situation. In other words, I saw an article where somebody suggested that it looks like a woman is put through this terrible, degrading situation. And it's another example of a woman's vulnerable position in a male-dominant society. So this person wanted to argue quite the opposite. How is it the opposite? First of all, she gets to decide if she wants to go through it or not. Right? Let's say she goes through with it. Let's say she doesn't go through with it. Once she's divorced, she's not encumbered. In other words, there's no limit to what her life can be afterwards. She can marry whoever she wants. She can go about her life. There is no legal stigma. That doesn't mean there isn't a cultural stigma that would happen. That would depend on the people of the time. But there's technically no legal stigma. She goes unencumbered into another life. Let's say she wants to go through with it. So this actually requires a Talmudic addition. Let's say she wants to go through with it. So if in fact she was intimate with another man and it was adultery, whatever happens to her happens to that man. This is a Talmudic addition. This is not something you could tell from the text. It's implied or it's learned from the text, but it's not that if you read the text, when we read the text, you don't necessarily see anything about that. But this is taken for granted by the Talmud, that whatever happens to her happens to him, wherever he is. whatever happens to her happens to him, which means that she's the one who determines what happens to this other guy. Because if she decides not to go through with it, nothing will happen to the other guy. If she decides to go through with it, then if she dies, the other guy dies. So the fate of the man in the relationship, we're thinking about the wrong man. You're thinking about the power dynamic between the husband and the wife. But think about the power dynamic between the wife and her suspected paramour. In that case, she's in the power position, not the man. So they, and so again,
She has to destroy herself in order to destroy him. I don't
right,
get it.
but she can. In other words, he ultimately, is it likely it will happen? No. But technically, she's in this is what the person wanted to argue. Technically, she's in the position to determine the fate of the paramour. It's in her hands.
Right, so
It's
if she-
unlikely she would do it, but it's in her hands.
Right, so if she decides not to go through with it and they get a divorce, she can go and marry the paramour.
That is a lot. That is also, the Talmud learns it out from the verse that she cannot. He's the
See?
one guy who cannot. She can, if she's suspected, and this might be another motivation for her to go through with it. If she's suspected of intimacy with somebody and doesn't get resolved, we do not allow them to get married. She cannot stay married to her husband either. In other words, she's in a limbo as far as her husband and the suspected paramour.
That's
Once,
if we know who the suspect.
So I
right, what happened
disagree.
is,
I disagree with the person who said she's in a power. All she can do is die in order for him to die too. I don't.
but I just want you to know, I also am not, I also sort of chuckled when I read this, but I will say that this is an argument made for a guna, because when people argue that one of the arguments people make about the chained wife is that technically she could remain chained forever. But in order for her to remain chained forever, let's say they live in Israel, in order for her to remain chained forever, he actually would be in prison. He wouldn't be able to have work. In other words, he would have to decide that he is going to suffer for the rest of his life in order to inflict suffering on her. And in the Aguna situation, that's taken for granted that many men would.
Yeah.
Many people have meant. So I'm saying, if you say it there, then it's only fair to say it in the Sota situation, that's called having power. Even though the only way she could exercise that power is by killing herself, basically. But technically, that's called, well, we're saying it with him too. You're saying it with the Aguna situation, that's called power, because he'll just stubbornly go to jail, and he'll stubbornly, live a life of ostracism and everything else.
But
because
she won't be able to marry again.
I know, but I'm saying, but you're okay with the scenario that he basically has to ruin his life to exercise this.
Well, it's something. It's something, but it doesn't help her with going on with her life.
I agree, but I'm
Okay.
saying, but then you can't say that the fact that she has to kill herself to kill him is also not a power. They both have powers. They both have power. Either one doesn't have a power, the other one doesn't. Anyways, but I agree with you that and the
I
issue
think
here
that's
is
power that nobody really wants.
right. The issue here is
Right.
there is one scenario, and this it is important to see this, because the Gemara points it out that the Gemara says, why is it that God allows for his name to be erased? Because part of the concoction that the Sota drinks, she drinks a concoction. There's water that's spring water, and then there's some dust from the dirt of either the Mishkan, from the floor of the Mishkan or the Beit HaMikdash. There's some dust off of the floor, and then there's the ink from this curse that's written out there's this curse that's written out on parchment, or before parchment, it was on leather. They would scrape it. They scrape the ink off after it dried into the water. And part what they're scraping off is this curse. And in the curse, God's name is mentioned. It is forbidden to erase God's name. There's no other circumstance that you're allowed to erase God's name. So why? So the Talmud says, why are they erasing? Why are they allowed to erase God's name? In other words, why does God allow his name to be erased? For the sake of peace. God allows his name to be erased so that there could be peace between husband and wife. So you see from here that they understood that the ultimate purpose of this is peace between husband and wife. But this would have to be such a pristine situation. In other words, it would have to be a situation where it happened, like we said. She's really, let's say, planning a, you could say she had a weak moment. Let's say she did have a weak moment. And she was flirting with another man. And it,
But that's as far as it
but
went.
that's as far as it went. And maybe she was going, and maybe she even wasn't sure when she was going to meet with them if she's going to have an affair or not. But the bottom line is she didn't do it, right? So now, in that scenario where she didn't do it, that's the scenario where this situation, you could see how this situation might accomplish that goal of removing the doubt from the husband. But there would have to be so many things that worked out just right in order for that to be how this plays out. We know from the way things tend to happen, and we've seen it in other cultures. We see it in especially up to this day in certain parts of the world, that it's not how it ends up playing out. But the way it ends up playing out in a culture where women are vulnerable and don't have equal power in society, the way it tends to work out in these kinds of things is it becomes a method for demeaning somebody or punishing somebody for behavior that you don't like. And so even though, again, you could see a scenario, and I think it's important, it is important for it to be brought out that the kind of scenario in a test tube kind of situation where you're or in a some kind of sterile laboratory where everything's playing out in a best case scenario. It's important to see that there is a kind of Bertie Wooster kind of possibility here. But then also obviously to recognize that when somebody sees this scenario, the way it has played out so many times in history is that it's been a vehicle for punishing a woman for
Acting like a woman.
for acting like a, yeah, right. So that also has to be recognized. And when somebody is
Should the husband,
yeah.
once a woman goes through this and proves to her husband that he's wrong, shouldn't he have some kind of penalty? Or, I mean, yeah, she's not going to look the same at him for the rest of her life. Oh, no.
Right.
Okay.
And plus,
How
I guess
dare
part of the
you not
penalty,
trust me?
right? He's going to have
Right.
to hear. Also, he has to hear her say, "I told you so."
That's
Yeah.
right.
Very hard.
Right.
That's very hard for men. I think there's some men that would rather anything but that.
But I told you so.
No, but I agree.
See, you were wrong.
I mean, there is in the Talmud, it spends a good deal of time talking about blessing. She'll have blessing and etc. to sort of make up for
Wait a minute, where is she
everything she
getting the
went through.
blessing?
She part of the blessing is having children, more children. That would be part of the blessing. But I'm sure it plays out in many other areas of her life. And you'd like to believe that she is fully compensated for having to go through it. Now, if you ask Job, when he got all the blessing at the end of the book of Job, if he would he have looking back, felt like he's better off for having gone through everything he went through, because he got that blessing at the end. I'm not sure what Job would have said about that. And so, but it's important to acknowledge both sides of this, and even for those people who feel that it is their responsibility to defend the Torah against ridicule, and therefore stridently make this point that this is ultimately for the well-being of the couple, and if they, even in this, as I saw an argument made that the woman is in a power position, I can see why somebody feels the need, especially if they've heard the Torah ridiculed, to do this, but it needs to be acknowledged that that just from our experience with how things have gone up until now, you don't. It certainly would have. You could see how it certainly would have been misused. Without a doubt, right?
Because if it kept going into present times,
Right.
half the population would be gone.
Right. Now, that's another thing. I mean, they stopped doing it. I think part of the reason they stopped doing it was because of, at some point they're not going to do something if there's no advantage to doing it. There were those who suggested that, like, that they stopped capital punishment because it wasn't going to deter crimes anymore, and it does seem at one point they did stop the sota ceremony, and this would be, and part of the reason they would stop it is because the feeling is it had no place anymore in the society. It wouldn't work or on any level. But if you're looking for a scenario that still deserves some attention, and certainly there are mediators in marriages who wish that there was some Bertie Wooster solution to some of these situations. The fact that that there was a possible way to do it and that it's not available it's not necessarily entirely a cause for celebration. The misuse of it is a terrible thing, but you are missing out on an option to there was something there that might have helped in certain situations, and it's not available. By the way, we're studying the tractate Gittin in Daf Yomi, and there was somebody who was recently divorced. A man who was recently divorced was part of the class, and at the end of the class, he came over and asked me if in the future, when I bring up the issues of aguna, that I make it clear that men can also be in aguna situations. And what he told me was that it took him 3.5 years to give a divorce, because nowadays, at least amongst Ashkenazim, the court will not grant a divorce if the woman refuses to accept it. And in his case, his wife refused to accept the get. And it took 3.5 years, and he had to pay her in the end. He said, I had no choice. I had to pay her. And it took 3.5 years before she was willing to accept the get. And this was in Chicago. And on several occasions, he went to this is him obviously telling me this, but he said it's important that people know this. So I'm saying it out loud because he asked me to say it, that he said that if you go to the CRC, if you're a man and you go to the CRC and you say, can't we just give it to her against her will, they will say, no, we don't do that. For the past 1,000 years, we don't give against her will. And he said there for 3.5 years, he was trying to get a get, to give the get to his wife, and he wasn't able to do it. And he eventually had to pay her in order to give a get. And he said, whenever these scenarios come up, the other scenario is spoken of, and the other scenario needs to be spoken of. It needs to be spoken of. But he said his scenario, which is not uncommon, he said he's been on chat groups. He's been on chat groups, and he said in these chat groups, there are many, many people, he said, dozens, he claims dozens. They are not all, verified, but dozens of people who claim to have been in a similar position to him, or it took years before their wives accepted the get. And many of them had to pay money. In other words, it involved financial settlement before the wife was really a kind of a blackmail, the kind of thing that you often hear the other way around. But he was saying it happens this way. And it might be different in Hasidic courts, he said. It might be different in Sephardic courts. Because there were people who said that in their case, the court just accepted the divorce on behalf of the wife. But he brought this up to the CRC, and the CRC says, no, we don't do that. Never heard of it. We're not doing it. And yeah. Okay. Well, it's because it's 11 o'clock. Okay.
Thank you.
I am told that that carrots taste good in cholent. That's what I was told.
Probably.
Yes.
Oh.
Okay. It's been great. I say we do this again next week.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Be well, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good Shabbos.
Shabbos.
Shabbos.